Zach from Gravel Bike, California, back here in the Lost Coast, ready to scout the Usal Hopper. If you go back recently in the GBC archives, you'll see on my 300-mile multi-day adventure that this was the most difficult part. Not just physically, but mentally. The Usal Hopper from Grasshopper Adventures alleviates all that with its support and organization. Today, I'm going out with Mig to scout a new portion that's going to be added through redwoods that are on private land. So, let's get lost. Let's roll. We all have adventures that feel like unfinished business, as the middle day of my Lost Coast expedition was both the shortest and toughest, with the effort playing only part of the story, as coming across people once over 20 miles of Usal Road.
Hello!
The fear of isolation felt real, fueled even more by my foggiest day. When Mig invited me to scout for an expanded route for the Usal Hopper, I knew that I had to take a chance at redemption while I had it. Most don't know about this region, otherwise it wouldn't be called the Lost Coast, which starts where Highway 1 turns inward away from the Pacific, rolling through the heart of the redwoods, ending at the 101 in Leggett. Previously, the Usal Hopper took place on lands west of Highway 1, but our mission was to expand the footprint by exploring on the other side. While we were out to scout the long route, which would have clocked in around a metric century, the eastern side featured a few moments with backtracking, stifling some of our long-term plans. So instead we finished the western side, mostly covering the shorter Mediano route, ending the ride on an absolute high. There's an extensive amount of acreage out here that comes with some caveats to riding. While Usal is a county road open to public use, everything east is under the purview of the Redwood Forest Foundation, working to combat more invasive species, allowing the redwoods to thrive again, while restoring the ecosystem and making the forest more climate resilient, meaning you need special use granted to ride these roads. Like most events, there's some travel involved, as the starting line sits about 4 hours north of San Francisco, but it's gorgeous along the coast, so you'd be doing yourself a disservice not extending your trip as much as possible. The best overnight possibilities are camping at Westport Union Landing and Westport Beach RV Park, all right along the coastline and within 10 miles of the start. I decided to stay with a few more amenities 45 miles away in Fort Bragg. That's the largest town on the coast between San Francisco and Eureka, with a lot of opportunities to dawdle around. We met just a little north of the event's start, meeting at the Redwood Grove picnic area that we turned into staging grounds of our own. Mig led the way out onto Highway 1, with Roger, Grant, and Dan, part of our starting 5, enjoying the silky smoothness of this repaved road while we can. This schoolhouse is the last remaining building from Rockport, with Mig pointing out the Hopper starting area to our left, and the former hub of the town that once reached 500, where we would start today on the other side of Rockport Creek. We had to enjoy the flatness while it lasted, knowing that it would be a certain anomaly, despite the number of creeks we would come up on, as it wasn't a matter if we were going up, but how. Our first stab of upwardness didn't look too promising, as the option heading further east took some maneuvering to start, while the grade was just outside of putting us in the red. With the horizontal trees stacking up larger and larger, and the pitch not getting any friendlier, made us think we should be scouting a better maintained road instead.
A little bit of a wrong turn, but that's why we're out here.
There was no shame turning tail, testing our first descent with a pretty good surface, but we did temper it being the only ones out here. And on to the junction to the road that we thought we should have taken looked even less promising than the last. So with Mig in the trees, I took a look at Grant's custom steel bike made by Fitz Cycles out of Sonoma County. But we got back to moving and our last and only option left that took us more towards the center of the region. We knew we had a significant climb ahead of us to get us up to the first divide, but hard to gauge the effort when you don't know how long, hoping the spray paint would give us some indication of distance. While the grade stayed around 9%, the direct sunlight was starting to be an issue, though fortunately this was the longest stretch of exposure for the day. But how would we know that? We took a break at the next decision point after 3 miles of climbing, with my GPS telling me we were about to head in the wrong direction, but so far it had only been half right. We weren't too afraid of this uncertainty. That disappeared more while enjoying these rollers, noting how playful these conditions were, even though they weren't made for recreational use. My fear that we were headed west came to fruition, making an about face a half mile in, with a bit of a climbing penalty as we were riding the ship. We were appreciative of getting some downhill payback. That was the proper pitch and angles to release our brakes, worthy of one of my typical montages normally, but a good thing I didn't, as Mig tore his tire on this relatively tame surface, as it was tube time. Just lucky we had enough tubes. Hard to believe we were only on mile 9, but the next 9 miles only stayed within 150 feet of elevation, though something else of consequence happened in this area. Not just the number of waterway crossings, but that all drained into the South Fork of the Eel River. You could tell it was the middle of the day as these tall trees weren't casting shadows, and good for some sign of some organized human activity, but I was pretty certain we were down another tube.
Nothing to see here, Zach. Nothing to see, bro.
I'm not even recording, don't worry about it.
Although we were making good progress, I knew we'd have to do at least one more big climb back to the highway, while gauging my water with no potable possibilities along the way. It seemed like we were starting this significant climb, though might have I said we were off course. But knowing this wasn't a charted area on GPS devices, I deferred easily.
Studying the map. There's the map, and then there's the actual official map. And we are there.
While our courses may not look elegant on Strava, we were all in. Despite this climb that was largely crossing double digits, as there wasn't a concern about getting lost, even though we weren't precisely sure where we were going, with us having just enough energy after this 2.5 mile effort. In part 27 of We Do the Work, we had some doubts on the next descent that were quickly quelled, then overwhelmed, not wanting to climb more if we were wrong. So we retreated looking for the parallel road, perhaps overly committed, missing the turnoff, with this new option offering our first hike-a-bike, facing our highest amplitude section of the day, meaning a lot more brake clamping on the descent. But just as we were returning to a more normal slope, we passed the earlier road we abandoned that looked so much tamer. Oh well. Being past 2:30, there was some underlying urgency, playing into maybe taking turns a little too fast, coming across another bridge with guardrails being a first, where you step back and think about the amount of infrastructure here that only a few have gotten to use. I knew we were about 5 miles from Highway 1, but Dan surprised me noting we were actually closer to the 101 while wild pigs crossing weren't in my expectations either.
Oh, and there's one over there. You can smell your mama, you'll find her.
We had one more objective in this section, in locating the recently acquired century-old Reist Ranch, and we thought we found the proper road, but the fear of digging a bigger hole and staying upright offered another turnaround. And while heading back towards the highway, we were able to triangulate our position, and yeah, we had been close, but not fretting about it at this time. The final climb out was palatable, and it was nice to find the friendly tarmac of Highway 1, still having a good amount in the tank, even with this 2.5 miles of climbing.
It's gonna keep getting gooder.
I'm always amazed how quiet this part of the highway is, turning for a purposeful pull-off, as Dan stashed food and water earlier. Although as much as I probably needed sustenance, I wasn't happy my stomach didn't feel like obliging. The downhill of Highway 1 feels like it was built just for bicycles, testing the limits of how much you want to bank, but Grant and Roger headed back while following Dan and Mig for an abbreviated version from our original plan, taking this logging road that heads down to the beach, making a strong case to do the shorter Usal hopper route, as 6 miles of dirt descending is already a rarity, but so is the surface and loose turning radius, making it really fast, with these conditions being so unexpected from this geography. And while the pitch flattens a bit towards the end, the greenness is a new sensation that overwhelms. Mig led us off the Usal route, onto a trail so lush it'd be hard to spot Kermit within, as you can appreciate this moment as much without being here, catching a glimpse of the Lost Coast while being enveloped for so long. I felt like you needed awareness in this verdant density, averting over an Ewok, although I was closer to losing my head like riding a speeder bike, with this feeling deepened on the Creekside Trail, where you're missing out if you're not appreciating these second and third growth redwoods. As with all this tight maneuvering, you'll have plenty of opportunities to stop to look up. Mig was going to milk this experience as much as possible, even if it meant shedding the bikes, where you're in awe, comprehending the architecture of these candelabra redwoods. And the Pro Fun Tour continued heading down to the vast campground that is Usal Beach, where I was absolutely in awe of balancing.
Oh yeah.
It was definitely going through our minds, wishing we could set up camp here now. Though time to make our final push out, finding the unconventional way, of course, as ascending out of the Lost Coast is as tough as you'd expect. Over the first 3/4 of a mile, with the effort shifting some of your focus away from the views, as this climb was a bit of redemption for me, able to enjoy it more without my previous clunky setup, but also much better timing with the views that were completely fog covered a couple years before. With a 1/3 of a mile climb on Usal being our last, I knew this 2-mile descent would be a big exhale from the previous experience, remembering that feeling from one of my biggest accomplishments, exiting out from one of the most unique challenges you can face, and the release onto the swiveling flow, not to mention receiving these singular views of the Lost Coast that are only earned by completing such an effort. You'll feel the transition heading inland and saying goodbye, as the return to Highway 1 hits you more spiritually than physically, with the closest you'll feel to floating on the way back, feeling completely fulfilled closing this loop. We properly punctuated the day back at the campground, taking in the final moments of daylight with so much coast that defined our adventure, as a complete way to bid farewell to the light that guided us around the Lost Coast.
This really showed the dichotomy in my two ventures. The first time I knew where I was going, but was fearful the whole time. Here we got lost a few times, but I enjoyed the exploration. Isolation can be quite scary, but when you have a backup plan and feel well supported, it really allowed us to let go and just enjoy what it feels like to properly experience the scale and area and landscape that you can only do by a bike. You know, Mig appreciates that and incorporates this with his event, so I hope you get to experience too. If you'd love to help us with our adventures, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, go to our shop, or support us on Patreon so we can bring you more. From the State of Dirt,